Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to our another session of Startup Essential Talk series. I'm Shriparna from IIT Madras Incubation Cell. So Startup Essential is our flagship training series where we have talks covering topics of core entrepreneurial and startup themes. On that note, we have with us today Mr. Mahesh Yagnaraman, who is the Country Director of Acumen for India, and Mr. E. Nandakumar, who is the CEO of International Center for Clean Water at IIT Madras. Now, I would like to request Nandakumar sir to take over and introduce Mr. Mahesh.
Yeah, thank you, Shriparna. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Mahesh Yagnaraman. I'm used to calling him Yagi, but we'll call him Mahesh for the show, as today's speaker. He comes with rich experience in diverse fields and continents. He's a graduate from Delhi University in economics, and we studied together at XLRI in marketing and finance and systems several decades ago. And since then, we have remained in touch, and it's a great pleasure to reconnect with him. As I said, Mahesh has worked with multinationals in India and overseas. After a brief stint in Bloplast, if I'm not wrong, if my memory serves me right, then he moved on to Unilever Arabia and Castrol, British Petroleum. At BP is when the startup bug bit him. And he, along with a colleague, went on to launch First Energy, which was providing affordable cooking medium or cooking fuel to bottom of the pyramid households. I mean, this is what I remember. I'm sure he will share much more of his experience during the day. Mahesh is currently Acumen's India Country Director, and he's been an entrepreneur, a CEO, and a strategic professional for over 30 years. So I would request all of you to participate actively and ask questions. I think Mahesh has warned me that he would not speak for 1.5 hours. He will speak for maximum 45 minutes. But I'm sure he will answer every question that you have. So with that, I would like to hand over to him and step back. Over to you, Mahesh.
Thanks a lot, Nandakumar, Nandu. And yeah, firstly, I think genuinely humbled by the opportunity to talk to all of you. When I say that each of you are in various stages of finding out the path which you want to do for your passion and what drives you to make a change, that's how I see what all of you are. Of course, I see a lot of doctors here, so I don't know who they are, some of them, whether they are also incubation companies or they are some professors, I won't know. So I'll be a little careful with their professors. So, but other than that, really thanks again. And I think I'm thanking IIT Chennai for two perspectives. One is to call me, that is one, but more importantly, for agreeing to a topic which I suggested and Nandakumar and I bounced off, which is actually about social impact. And some of you may wonder what is this about, and because this is not a standard regular thing about how to run a business, etc. It would look like that, but what is this about? And to be willing to actually have a conversation around that. So it's a great opportunity for me to have that conversation with all of you. So I will do one thing, that I will be using some slides to set up the conversation. Just give me a moment. I'll need some help to know whether it's all clearly visible. Some thumbs up.
It's visible.
It's perfect.
Perfect, great. So one request upfront is that while there are slides, they are guiding posts for this. And this is not a standard topic of trying to look at business model impact or a business model canvas and things like that. To that extent, this will get richer. If any of you want to ask any question, jump in. And if people want to build off each other, that'll be even great. So I think I just encourage all of you to kind of step in. And I did warn Nandakumar that I will not be able to speak for 45 minutes, but the bigger risk is I end up speaking for 1.5 hours. So it may be better to probably have a conversation along with all of you. So look forward to that. And let me kick into this by saying, why does social impact matter to us? And as much as the business revenue, which each of us have strived for and each of you striving for as you build your enterprise. I'll kind of frame it upfront a little bit based on one second. Just one, yeah. The world around us. I think the world around us, we all could reasonably say is in chaos. And one could argue it's always been like that. What's different? But it's particularly in chaos. And we all know we just have had the bout of COVID. It's not a post-COVID world yet. But if we kind of look at frame some of the biggest issues around us, the first one is some of them depicted in the photographs is actually about climate change. And when I talk about climate change here, it's not that climate change is going to happen. It has happened already. So all our roles in some ways are to adapt. We are all trying to reverse back. And of course, it's about I'm not getting into the technicality of 2 degrees and all that net zero, but the fact is that we have seen in the last few weeks how cities are getting choked up in India. Chennai has had one more bout after 2015. Then Goa, which never even has rain, has been flooded the last few days. So it's no longer a debatable point. It's already on us. So it's a question of how we are going to adapt. And what does it mean for us as individuals, society, and all is one point. But a larger point is anybody on the journey of a business, what is the impact on the climate and how you can adapt your solutions for your consumer or the people in your value chain or the society that you affect is going to become absolutely super important, if not today, in 5 years' time. And there are different reasons why it is like that, and we'll get into more of that later. The second point I think I also want to bring about is the aspect of inequality. And I say this from a place of a lot of privilege, which I have. But I just want to kind of share some of these numbers keep getting talked about, but whenever you hear it, it just strikes you. For example, just 1% of the world's richest, only 1%, account for over 50% of the wealth in the world. The top 10 billionaires and richest people, actually, their wealth is more than some of the large countries, even the size of Indonesia. They are that much. And more importantly, I think it's not getting better. For example, around 330 people used to account for the bottom 50% of the global wealth. That means for the bottom 50% of the global wealth. That means they were that rich, 320, 10 years back. Now just 25 people in the world actually account for the bottom 50% of the wealth in the world, which is by countless number of poor people who actually are in that bucket. And this is not getting better, and COVID has further exacerbated it. That's where the link with COVID comes. It's a post-COVID world, the impact, we don't even know what all it's going to be, but one of them is about global inequality. Around 3.6 trillion value has been created by the richest people, and 3.5 trillion value has got lost at the same time by people who have lost jobs in the same period. Why is it important to bring inequality here and into an incubation cell? And this is where the impact aspect comes. I think more and more the solutions we build need to take care of the larger sections, and in different ways it can be. It doesn't mean that everything directly needs to touch and connect, but unless we have solutions, we are likely to have fair amount of disruptions and other things which has been manifested in different parts of the world in different ways, and they are likely to go even more sharp in the years to come. But this all sounds a little gloomy and all that, but there is also hope. There are hopeful trends. It's not that it's all gone down the tube. COP26, it's been a lot talked about. It's not about COP26. There have been views that it's been a total failure. People have not done anything. The countries have stepped up. But the mere fact that there have been some conversation reignited because climate conversations had almost stopped because US pulled out is a big encouraging sign, though China has not come into place. But the bigger thing here is the countries and many powerful people in the world are willing to come together and talk about climate. And talk about climate and make clear promises. What is on the headline and all may not be very interesting, but a lot of deals and a lot of conversations happening on the side to see what can be done. Most powerful people at least are spending other work and trying to give time to this. This is an encouraging sign to get it back after so many years. And when it looked like it will totally collapse. The second thing is some of you might have heard of is a attempt last year and this year, and it's building up as a piece around global tax. Most of the richest companies in the world don't pay any tax because of the way they are housed in offshore entities and other things. They don't pay tax, and like companies like Amazon, Apple, all of them. And this is all because of the way we have created tax treaties, we have created global tax havens and all that. This affects in one way that the tax is not going, means that some of the development work cannot happen in countries. More importantly, there are countries where a lot of inputs are used by these companies, whether it's people or resources, but it doesn't pay any tax in that country. So the global tax is an attempt to actually find a way that the tax burden is actually borne by the company. And there are some measures that if you're having X number of amount of business or something in a country, you will have to pay tax, even whether you declare the profit in Ireland or you declare the profit in offshore, you have to pay tax. So it's a very significant step. G7 has signed up, G20 is going to look at it. It's still early days, but all these are trends which are going to impact each of us as we think about the future of the world. And the third part is to talk about pledge. While I talked about rich people getting very rich, there have been very interesting pledges which we have seen in the last 1 year. While the COP26 talked about net zero by 2050, the top 100 corporations, which is very encouraging, have actually signed up for doing that by 2040. If the top 100 companies can do that, it will basically mean that the chance of doing it by 2050 increases. So that's a pledge that the companies have taken. And I also noticed a very interesting pledge which has come from banks. Banks have talked about net zero. One would normally think banks don't have nowadays so much footprint and what is it. But the interesting thing is that the banks are going to be very slowly look at their portfolio and lend to companies, not lend to companies which are climate negative, if I could use a word like how carbon intensive. And of course, they will start with oil companies and others, but because they all have them in the portfolio. But one can imagine a world in 5 years, probably 10 years, this will become an important point that they will look at, besides your balance sheet and others, that are you negative on climate? Are you going to be impacting the people affected by, in the whole business? And that's going to affect whether you go to get a loan or not. So that is kind of one of the pathway which has started. And so these are very interesting pledges. Why is it all happening? All moving towards conversation which has started again about what's called a stakeholder capitalism and not just a shareholder capitalism. And it doesn't mean stakeholder is excluding shareholder. It's just that the stakeholder includes the others who we impact. These are things which are gaining ground. When it, again, on stakeholder capitalism, there are 50 companies which have signed up that they will start reporting metrics, which is not just about profits and finance, but also about how many people they are employing, how many people in their second level change they are improving in their livelihood, etc. And they're going to start sharing that. So before we go into this further on that, when we now come back from the macro to the micro, there are different ways we can think about it, right? If I could, for a moment, open it up and ask some question, I should have before put this slide, maybe if there's a way to go back. If I have to ask some of you, I want to just hear some voices here, that who do you think is the important stakeholder? Which aspect of your business? If you had to just call out who are the most important stakeholders for you? Just want to hear voices. There's no right, wrong answer, obviously. And I just want to know who you see as the most important stakeholder. Any voices here?
I think people are putting onto the chat box. You can read it.
Yeah.
So we have answers in the chat box ranging from customers, vendors, employees.
Yeah, I'm able to see. Sure, thanks. So yeah, they are about customers, they are about employees. Now let's spend a bit, we all know that we all talk about the fact that consumer is a queen, king, etc. But more importantly, there is a clear thing you would have heard. There are companies which clearly talk about how may not be consumers because they may not directly touch consumers. If their employees cannot actually feel totally motivated and be not just motivated at a level to perform, but feel central to the aspect of the work that the company is doing, can they really create a consumer experience? So that there are people who really talk about employees. And then when you say community, I'm using a broader word here. It includes shareholders, it includes the value chain, as you said, vendors, supply chain, which are all most often thought of as something you want to optimize. You want to kind of use them as cost centers. And but what can that do to your business over a longer period is always a question mark. So all this leads to what eventually I would call as looking at social impact in a manner that, of course, you have to take care of consumers in terms of the positive impact on them, employees, and the whole chain and the people, stakeholders you impact, which I call community purposely. And that's all kind of taking us towards what I would call the founding blocks of thinking about social impact. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? So, so again, I want to open it out into the room. All of you must be at various stages of either concept or proof or already adding revenue. Some of you, if I had to ask some of you, what are the social issues you solve? I'm not asking what's the business you're doing. I'm not asking what product you sell, but do you think you solve any social issue?
I suppose people can unmute and speak up also. That will make it more lively.
Yep, that'd be great. Do you all solve any social issues with it? Thanks, Vignesh. Yes. Access and inclusion for people with speaking difficulties.
So this is Sim.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we are developing a platform which will help cosmetic industry to create products that is devoid of human health risk and which is not going to be harmful for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a unique platform to accelerate clean beauty industry product development.
Thank you. Lovely. I see some very good things on the chat box. Epicycles, agri-waste free. That is great. Taking packaging out of it. Differentiated prices for farmers. Upcycle what?
Yeah, sorry, I got a lot of typo. I don't know why. So I wrote that. I'm Aditya. So what we do is we upcycle agricultural waste in the farms directly, and we make secondary packaging to replace styrofoam out of it.
Styrofoam, okay. Got it. Yeah. Thanks. So do you all think in your mind, some of you or most of you, do you think you're all solving social issues? How many of you feel like that? It's a yes or a no answer, or yes but or a no but. I'm okay with that.
Absolutely yes.
Absolutely yes. Krishna Kumar, explain.
Yes, Dr. Simi, who's raised her hands, you can go.
No, I just said, yes, I strongly feel the solution that we are bringing into the market is solving a huge, enhances the community health and the environment overall.
Mm-hmm. So when I say social issue, it can give a sense that this is some Jolna bag stuff. It's not. So what I mean by that is, you're all talking about access. I hear the word access really in several examples, whether it's Kirti or it's Aditya. And the second part is actually the one about inclusion. Sometimes you may not make a product or a service which probably, if I could call it, affect either poor or may not solve immediately direct problem. It may not look like that. But how you run the business in terms of values of inclusion, whether it's your employees or your service providers, that itself can be a model. And I'll I'll come to a very important one, which is close to all of us as an example for that. And that's as important. It's not necessary to think about it like only from the question of the product or the service that I make. It's also how I run my enterprise, how I want to think of my enterprise. What are the values of inclusion I build into that is actually a phenomenal example, because entrepreneurs today are examples. Entrepreneurs like you are examples. How you do that is actually you role model what it means to solve social issues. You don't have to do anything else, but doing the work that you do in a manner which is inclusive of the voices which are not heard is itself a social issue. And that's how you level the playing field. The playing field is leveled out. We talked about inequality. It's not about, it's actually trying to give access, trying to provide, trying to really look at it inclusively. Now, all this is good only if we have a sight line to impact and sight line to scale. We can talk about all that, and that's where it's as important as revenue. It's not one versus the other, is that it needs to happen at scale, and impact also is important only at scale. We cannot have an impact at a very small level while we talk about, say, revenue at a high level. And why I put a picture of all of you know Vembu probably very well from Chennai. Is a very, very clear example. His product, which is Zoho SaaS platform, is not meant for anybody who's poor, or his solution is not directly, it's overall helping other companies to improve productivity. But during COVID, he made this step of trying to work out of villages, and more importantly, created work centers in different parts of Tamil Nadu and actually encourage people to start doing that. And even if somebody wanted to do, basically change the way they work, because it all became very different in terms of the work from home, which some of us are still facing. The beauty of it is he just didn't do it for the effect. Actually, he's been measuring the impact he's creating on this in terms of improved incomes. And he actually sees improved educational outcomes in the communities where people are actually working, in terms of people who have gone back. So, and even in terms of actually how improved access is there to women. So a phenomenal model. And it is not nothing to do, as I said, with the product or service he's doing, but how he's actually trying to look at creating an inclusive way to do the business, which was within the same business, one would not think about it. It's a cubicle model normally. People sit in cubicles and work. So how he's remodeled that is I think he's a social entrepreneur. So anybody who's actually looking at impact in different ways is, in my mind, a social entrepreneur. I mean, there may be various definitions for it, but this is one of the ones I use. And so who is a social entrepreneur? So for all these social issues we are talking about, you all raised issues around what you're trying to do for farmers, how you're looking at cosmetic industry, how can you take care of the issues there. The main thing is market-based solution, because we are still talking about it being an entrepreneurial solution. The only thing is the second and the third point becomes more important in my mind, is prioritization of transformative impact while striving for financial sustainability. It's not a either or, and it is a polarity to manage. It is not, when you look at it as, oh, this versus that. I think Nandakumar will also remember this. In the past, people used to talk about quality versus quality. If you do a lot of quality, you have to have good quality, you have to do price. Nowadays, nobody talks about it. The discussion is over. Nowadays, if you do things which doesn't have quality of a certain level or a minimum expected, not even a minimum of a high quality, you don't have a chance. So the discussion around quality has moved so much. I'm not trying to say everybody produces the best quality product, but what I'm trying to say is the discussion around quality as to how you need to look at it is no longer in the lexicon, because it's considered as a basic starting point. This is what will happen to impact, in my mind, in 5 to 10 years. If your work is not going to create positive impact for some of the constituents, if not all of them, I think it's going to be hard. And there are many people who will make it difficult. Number one will be the consumers. Number two will be employees, or number three, there may be other effects one doesn't want to have. So that's going to be what it is. And the only way a social entrepreneur differentiates, or an entrepreneur differentiates, is actually putting intentionality to it. What I mean by intentionality is not just, okay, I'm doing this, this also happens by the side, but actually saying, no, this is important for me. While this is revenue dollars, revenue rupees, I think this will make a difference. And I want to have that as a core. Is, I think, where the difference in a social entrepreneur to someone who's not a social entrepreneur. So, and why am I mentioning this? This is something which is looked at a lot by impact investment firms. I'm keeping some time at the end of this for talking to me if people want to know about investment. As I currently run India's arm for Acumen, which is into impact investment. And one of the things we look at is intentionality of and how they want to think about it and how they want to make a difference on that. So it's, and not just us, many other impact investment firms look for that. So it's an important criteria, and it will become more and more as you start doing it. And how do you do that? It's start with a simple hypothesis for whatever be your business. And I'll go into a little bit of framework after this, and then pause. Very simple, start with the consumer, start with the customer. And that's where impact is, because most of the impact you can do, not just the person being happy with the product or solution, but I'll come to that in terms of, and similarly employees. And in both their journey, we have to understand their journey of how they engage internally and externally and the moments which they face and how they actually interact with you. And that's kind of what the impact that you create. What's the customer experience, consumer experience, and the employee experience? This is the basic stuff at a very minimal level. And of course, then you have to layer it in with vendors, supply chain as you grow. You're all in incubation cells. I'm not trying to see that you need to look at everything, but how these moments actually form part of the journey for you. And to do this, you need to know the history, because sometimes and also the larger system in which you are working, and keep iterating that actually impact. Okay, am I impacting the consumer positively on this? But I am, in order to provide that consumer experience, my employees are totally screwed. Then you have to take care of the fact that that is not happening, right? So how do you kind of balance this and iterate is actually part of the whole thing to keep moving. So this is very simple way to start, but how do you move further on this journey of impact? Is that number one, we can talk about impact, but it's very, very hard to measure. It's actually easier to measure financial than impact. First of all, what is impact? And how can you measure it quickly? There is a speed involved. At what stage you need to measure it? And what's the kind of rigor which needs to go into it? Causality is very important. Is it really causing it, or it's incidental? And it needs resources. And there are a lot of frameworks here to look at it. And I want to first of all warn that some of these frameworks are not meant for any of you, but I'm just conscious I'm coming into the umbrella of trying to talk in an academic institution. So I just wanted to ensure that all the frameworks are at least referred, even if I'm not going to go into that. There are very simpler ones in this, there are complicated ones. Social return on investment is a fairly simple one. It is what it says. It's basically for every investment. The social, if you can measure certain social returns, that you can kind of capture that. It's quite simple. A lot of people do that and kind of talk about that, even at a very early stage in their journey as a company. Second is a theory of change framework. I'll go into this a little bit deeply. I'll kind of explain it with examples and all that. And lean data, how do you kind of use that with a very lean amount of data, not too much. Then the larger, as you grow in the system, you will start having mission alignment scorecards. And I don't want to even talk about RCTs, randomized controlled trials, which are mainly come from the non-profit world, but they are very important for establishing causality. Because if you talk to really the researchers, they will say correlation is not causation. We all know that. But RCTs is one method which is seen as establishing causality, but it's super expensive, cannot be done by all the companies. It's not something which is I would even recommend, but these are frameworks people use. And some of the funders at some stage, if they are impact investors, will ask you to give proofs. And that's where I'm trying to say some of these frameworks which are there. And systems change frameworks is another one which is used. I think, if I'm not wrong, the last session Nandakumar did was on systems change, though it was more about building it for a business. But how can you use, how are you affecting the larger system through your business? The most important thing is how to collect data for all this. And that's why, and how easy it is, how resourceful it is, how hard it is. That's important decision to be made. And whatever is easy is what one should start. But intention, developing the impact hypothesis is the first part. I think going back there and starting there, say, okay, my consumer, other than buying my product and consuming, has this experience, which is good, and starting to think about that deeply is your first journey towards impact. Similarly, how the employees are feeling about your company. I think that's kind of where it starts. And typical measures of impact is there are two. One is called the breadth, other is called the depth. And breadth is fairly simple. It could be sales, but it's not always sales. It's basically number of end users who use the solar lantern, if you make one, or anything like that. However, it's not only one, right? If it is affecting a family, then you can use a multiplier assumption as appropriate, not to increase the number, but to know that if, for example, you give a solar lantern into a poor household, you are not just affecting one, you are affecting a household of 5. So that's kind of a very simple breadth measure which is done. But at times this is not easy. Number of users are not the metric collected. For example, you may be having a B2B business. Then you have a B2B, but that business may be impacting end users. Is there a way to look at them and think about the direct beneficiaries there? Or you may be having a situation when you're working with farmers, they are not consumers, but how you are affecting the farmers from a B2B angle in terms of how many of them are utilizing your product or a service is also simply, that's a breadth measure, nothing else. All that we need to be careful about is not having repeat, because as a consumer, there is a repeat purchase possible. Sales numbers is not always number of sales numbers are not always, I'm saying not always. Customers is because it will depend on different things, whether the product use is over a longer period of time. Is there a wastage involved in the product consumption itself, which makes the users less than the sales? And of course, the famous pipeline where it could be stuck. So sales is not representative of users. So picking up users as a breadth is a very simple measure of impact. How many people are positively impacted by what we do? The next one is in the impact measurement language is called the depth. And this is the holy grail of impact. How did our product or service or intervention meaningfully improve someone's life? And this is not about breadth. It's not just counting the numbers. And here, how did our product, service, intervention meaningfully improve? How do you look at that? It's not just output. You have to look at output as well as outcomes. That comes from seeing how a product or an offering was used or is used. And you have to look at all the dimensions that have the most meaningfully changed as directly as possible because of your intervention. And eventually, whether it has led to a quality of life for the consumer, which has improved, or has it gotten worse. And the way to do that is to be aware of the counterfactual. In order to use your product or service, while you may improve, you may also have a negative effect. For example, the product I tried to sell when I tried to do my own enterprise early days was trying to sell a cook stove. And while it was extremely positive for several dimensions, which was like fast cooking, it was able to do, consumers said tastier, everything. At the same time, it also initially it gave us, it didn't come out immediately, but after a while we kind of said, because it's fast cooking, it's so good, it also meant that they couldn't do some of the things which they normally do when they cook. And that means they had to have an alternative solution. So that while my solution on a broad basis was working for them, there was something they had to adapt and change. That is a negative effect. So being aware of the counterfactual is super important. How does the quality of life improve? Obviously by standard things like money. Are people able to earn more because of the solution? Are they able to save time? Are they able to save? Those are kind of things to look at to see whether the quality is improving for the users. I think this is what is called the depth. Very closely observe the challenges which they face. And the same thing, I will also switch it to talk about employees. We quite often don't give the employees the same amount of attention that we sometimes give to consumer. How hard is it for some set of employees to provide the service that you need for the consumer experience to be great? Of course, when you're a startup at an early stage, you don't have the luxury to have a large team. So obviously you will be bootstrapped, you will be running that very carefully. But you need to if you are able to see at the beginning signs that there are certain things which one does, which makes it very hard to achieve, Today, you may be doing it because you are a small setup, but when you scale, is that going away? Is the employee pain in providing a 24-hour service going to change when you scale, or is going to remain the same? Is the most important question to answer as you scale. That's important for the business metric. It's also important for employee and the impact that you create for the employee to work, not just as a machine, but much more than that, being charged with the work that you are making them do. I think that's a very simple example which I can think about. And here I've got these photographs of a company which is called S4S Technologies in the previous page and this. They make something called solar dryer, very simple product. It's sold to women in villages, household, and women basically have alternative incomes because of this. Solar dryer is what it is. Basically, they take certain types of vegetables, certain types of products, not everything, and they actually dry it. And because it is dried, it basically takes away the moisture and lasts longer, keeping the nutrient value 97+%. And it's sold to actually pretty large good companies like Marico, Nestle, and all our customers, including they've just started even with Unilever. So some of them buy from this company. For them, the breadth is not actually a number of solar dryers sold. It's actually they have women who work on that. Very simple to work, but they work on it, and sometimes a family member works on it overall. So the breadth is how many people it is affecting as a measure, I'm saying, for impact. Depth is more interesting. They obviously have given an alternate source of income to women. However, it's not straight away just to say that how much money they make. You have to see that they would have been doing something else which they stopped doing and doing this. How do you kind of pick that up, dimension up? Are you really making a difference to them on a total basis because their incomes have gone up? However, have they kind of given up something? And that's kind of one of the things they picked up. And of course, in this case, they give a very positive effect because the women's income and the family income goes up. Quite often, we all know that the farmers in India, majority of the farmers, smallholder farmers, majority of the farmers are smallholder. They earn hardly anything, any extra source of income, which is sustainably very good. So this is one of them, which is working for this company. It's called S4S Technologies. It's a patented solar dryer company, and a very interesting one at that. It's fairly early stage, but has good revenue, as I said, good customers already. But they thought about impact and output already, how they work on this. Other one to think about is a very simple thing to breadth and depth, but being conscious of the target population, because some of the solutions will vary across segments. It's a very simple point. For example, this company does ambulance service. It's a company called Zikitsa. It transformed the way ambulance service works in India. Previously, it was quite bad. On 26/11, when there was an attack in Mumbai, there was no ambulance outside. This was a private ambulance who had 10 ambulances at that time. They were the only ones who were there as soon as the incident happened. So they got noticed. And the whole industry got transformed after that because the government started feeling the need for ambulances in a very different way. They started doing a PPP model. Why is it needed? Because ambulances, as you know, take poor people who can't pay as well as rich people who can pay. So how do you kind of look at the segments which whom you are impacting? So you don't kind of count everybody is a very simple thing to keep in mind, because one of the things about putting numbers on impact is that should not become an end in itself, but being just aware of the target that you really want to impact to make a change. So there is a theory of change framework, which is used by us. And I want to say that when we look at investments, we look at this for every company which comes to us for investment. I'll illustrate this with an example. But before I go to this framework, I just want to pause. I have been kind of talking for a while. I just want to know if there are any questions, and then I'll go into this framework. It won't take long. And I just want to open up before we go there. Any questions on what, or any disagreements will be also great to have.
Yeah, Mahesh, Kirti here. So how do you typically balance the, do you see the needs between, making an impact and profitability as conflicting? And if so, how can companies actually balance that and walk the tightrope walk?
Sure. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think it will occur as a conflict. It will quite often occur as a conflict. I'm not taking that away to say that it's not as simplistic. So being simplistic, but that's what I said, right? Some time back, people used to think about this about quality. It's no longer going to be an option going forward because businesses nowadays are affecting society in much different ways than it did 10, 20, 30 years ago. And because you are having impact on them because of simple things like climate and also how much there is much more voice in terms of how you are affecting different people in terms of how you include, exclude solutions for people. And one thing I didn't talk about, which is also very contradictory. I know that you're going to have a session on marketing next month, and you should ask this question to the person who's going to come for marketing. All of us, including me, have always felt that, oh, I need to have more and more and more consumers using more and more and more of my product. One of the biggest thing is that some of the companies, including Unilever, is thinking about how do you moderate consumption. That will sound very crazy. Because that's why, because you don't need to consume some things to the level that which you kind of propagate, but you will still build value. And they are all exploring that because that's going to become important also for you. So the answer to your question is, how do you balance? I think I can talk from two perspectives. As an entrepreneur, I found it hard, and I want to be very honest about it. It was not that something which was easy for me when I was running my company. But for me, it was one of the main things is to try and make this not a either or question, but an and stroke or, and keep that in front of the center. Has it affected profitability? I don't think so, because I think what I may not be able to do is tick off every aspect of impact. I'll talk about this theory of change here, and that will tell you it's not about trying to have everything working. That's all I said, right? Impact consumer positively, impact employees positively, impact every value chain member positively. That will be hard for any startup, very hard for any startup until you reach a certain scale. But after some time, it's imperative that you have to do. There are many big companies which don't do that. So you'll give me examples of that. But I think I do not foresee a world in 10, 15 years where this will anymore be a choice. And it's just preparing ourselves for thinking about that upfront in our journey. I think that's all it is. There's been a big question here. Sleeper. You captured others. How is impact assessment fund different from a grant? Okay, I'll talk about that at the end. If you don't mind, you can ask me questions about how we look at investment. We don't do grants at all. We do equity investment. And I'll tell you about how we do that. I'll definitely answer that. If I don't, please bring that back to me. I'll definitely do that. I think social impact, how can you get more consumers on board directly? I think if we think about consumer in a narrow sense that they need to just buy and give you the dollar for purchase, I think that's a very narrow view. Even the best companies want to build a relationship with consumers, and that can happen only if you are able to think about their lives in a positive way. Not able to do that, and I'll go back to my own personal example to illustrate it. As I said, we made a successful product. We were selling very well. It was a stove. People were buying, and it was growing. I mean, I had 100,000 consumers in a short time. I think it became 500,000 very quickly. So it all looked fine. But at some stage, what was going on is there was also a lapse. A certain number of consumers would lapse out of the product after a while, after using. And we used to analyze that. And one of the biggest things was that as I said, while it provided solution for certain things, it was not complete in certain ways, and they had to substitute it with other things which they had to buy, which made it hard for the consumer segment that I was targeting. So I was not so aware of it, and we realized it much later to the cost, and we kind of had to do a lot of change, and in fact lost a lot of consumers in the process. If we had been able to think much more openly about how we were affecting them broader than just selling the number of stores that we were doing, I think we would have been much better. So I think the question here about how can it be used to gain consumers is actually looking at their consumer experience and not just one product or a solution that we sell. And how to convey the company's motives in the right manner to various others. Yeah, I think I'll cover this and the investment part subsequently, because I think those are probably towards the end. What's the thumb rule to measure startup impact and how to use it to raise funding? I guess I'm covering some of this, but I'll come to this theory of change framework for some of you to think about, and I'll use an illustration of a company which is fairly interesting company, which is working, and some of you will be able to identify similar ones since I hear people talking about working with farmers here. So it's very simple what you see here, right? Inputs, outputs, what you create from the company, outcomes you see, and then what's the impact you create. And let me show you the good example here. It's a company called KT. It does something called greenhouse in a box. People who know greenhouse is not anything new. It's been there for 20 years plus. It's basically used only by large farmers because it's very expensive. The innovation this company did is what is called as a greenhouse in a box, along with a bundled solution for smallholder farmers. Their consumer is smallholder farmer. This company wakes up every day thinking, whatever they do, are they going to make the lives of smallholder farmer better or not? That's the only question they ask. And if that is not, they won't do anything. This is kind of a super mission oriented in terms of benefiting smallholder farmer. And they do this greenhouse. They made it into a smaller unit because most of the farmers in India, smallholder farmers, cannot afford a greenhouse, which is large. Only small, big farmers can afford. And big farmers are very small in number in India. So if you have to really make a dent to smallholder, you need to make a smaller one. So their proposition is very simple. For the 1/8 of an acre, you put a greenhouse, and in 1 year, the income you get out of that will be double of the total income from your 1 acre plot. That's kind of what they work towards. So what are the kind of different things they solved? They looked at farmers lose 5 months from the data before they went. These are all consumer. If you really think about it, good consumer insight, which is building their product, is not, but all of them have layers of impact, which comes later. Farmers lose 5 months of crop due to excess heat. That's why the basic product is there, which is greenhouse. But they realize that is not enough because it needs to also go with a proper water solution. So they provide the whole thing in a bundle, which is including a drip irrigation solution as well as a mulching seeds to ensure there is no reduction in groundwater and the erratic rainfall is taken care. And they lose a lot of percentage of crops due to pest. And how do you kind of create a solution within that? So they give a whole thing together, greenhouse in a box plus, and this is just a consumer offer. If you really think about it, there is nothing earth-shattering about it. What they are doing is they don't have one product. They realize that in order to do greenhouse, they need to do 4 or 5 things. Only then the farmers can be productive. And they have created that bundle and nothing more than that. Then how do they look at this theory of change, or rather, how did we look at the theory of change in them? Is that, first of all, they sell greenhouses and they sell inputs to make the greenhouse work, farm inputs. They also provide market linkages to farmers because one of the things about farming is that people who know who are doing work in the rural area is that farmers need access. If you put some solution on, unless they have a clarity of can they sell into the market, it's not going to work. So they provide that. And also they have to train them to use it. So that's kind of where the input is. Output is very simple. Number of greenhouses sold, number of farmers they sell it to. That is what they measure, which is the breadth impact I talked about. Number of crops grown, how many crops can be used. And that's something they research continuously and keep putting it into it. And how much of the produce is sold at the farm gate from the greenhouses so that you are able to give them access to the market. They measure farmers' income, whether it's he's doing by, as I said, what affects and then going towards double. There's a stage where they see it in 6 months, their income needs to go up, and they really measure that for a lot of farmers, because otherwise they're not going to be there. So that's very simple. They also measure water usage, and that's easy. Farmers tell them, and that's a big thing. That's a big thing. We talked about various climate impact, which is there, and it's all talked about in the language of CO2 and all, but one of the big challenges India has is totally about water. And Nandakumar runs the whole center on water, so I'll be working on thin ice if I talk more on this, but it's one of the biggest issues. And how to decrease water usage is not just important for the company, KT, but it's important for the farmer, because that's one of the biggest issues she or he faces. I'm using the word she because a lot of farmers are women, because they work in the farm. Only thing is they don't have the credit for it. And that's why I'm saying that. And then how do you decrease the use of pesticides and other things is another thing they measure. These are all simple outcomes. And then the real impact is when you want to see whether there's the improved income and food security, because they're all smaller, the farmers. Does it lead to their standard of living increase, which is measured by them? And then much larger question is whether water and land resources are conserved. That's not measured frequently, but it's measured at a point of time over a couple of years, etc. But they do kind of take a dip, and that's kind of the business they run. This is a full stack company, which is still a startup. Something like that. They are quite small. They work out of corner of Telangana, and the founders go on to TED and talk about their solutions. So we're talking about the story to various audiences. They are a big evangelizer of why climate change is impacting farmers so badly and how they need to make a difference with the solution and what they're doing. So that leads me to the part which some of the questions are coming in. Impact helps you to build a narrative also. Definitely, you need to have your numbers ready. How much what's your business model? What's your value proposition? How are you hitting the consumer? And what's the numbers? How much it is going to scale? How much is revenue? All that is of course needed. But if you are able to build impact, when I say this, there is a possibility for an authentic storytelling. And I want to say because storytelling can be used as spinning a story. That's not what I mean. It's actually authentic. If you are able to talk about the difference you are able to make in the lives of people where you are having a solution, it puts you at a very different level of story for anyone audience you are connecting to. If you want to build alliances, if you want to connect with some policy people which will start coming over a period of time. If you are working in an area where you need to interface with policy, what's the story you have? It's not about your business model and how much you're selling. It's also about how you're impacting the people. And if you want to influence, when all of you dream about influencing the agenda on which you are working, then your impact story is a great way to build your narrative. One more thing is, someone asked me earlier that how can it improve consumers? Brand building never improves consumer immediately, even if you do advertising and all, except to some short-term measures. One of the ways is if you are able to talk consistently about your impact as part of your story, it improves your brand value. Very simple for people who are creating a brand. And this is recognized nowadays by very big companies. I keep taking FMCG company examples because that's where brand comes in front of you. You all know the examples. There are several of them. Some of them good, some of them controversial, how they want to build by their brand by talking about the impact they're having. For example, one of the brands which is well known to probably most of us here is Dow. And they talk about no longer just about it being a great product as a personal care product, but how is it taking care of people's self-worth and things like that, and what are they doing to that, and how they feature them, how they actually build it up. That's the way their brand is today. It's very less about what the product does to them. And finally, for fundraise. There are nowadays a lot of funds which have come in. I'm not talking only about funds like us. There are serious climate funds which are coming up, which are focused only on companies which are going to make a difference to climate change. There are going to be more and more funds like that, which will give funding if that is something your business does. So that is one aspect of the impact. There are, I don't know whether you heard of, there are funds which are gender focused. There's a very good fund called Parthenon in the South Asia. They actually fund if you are able to show that the way you are running the business or you yourself as an entrepreneur are actually making a big difference to the gender inequality. And there's a fund for it. So there are enough funds like that which are coming up. So your basket of funds which you're choosing is for funding varies. And they all look at some of these aspects, and it's an additional source of potential funding for you. And that's kind of where it can help fundraise. And there are in India, if you talk about impact funds, Acumen is one of the pioneers. We started very early in 2001, 2005, and there was no word called impact investment. It was not there in the lexicon. We called it patient capital, which will invest in enterprises which are solving problems and stay with them for a long time. That's what we started. And somewhere around 2005-07, the word impact investment got coined. Now, based on which different sources you cite, there is anywhere between billions of funds, $1 billion equivalent funds in India. And that's because now TPG, Rise, and some of the big names also come into impact, and one can question them whether they are really impact. And I'm not getting into that controversy at the moment. But even if you say shave off all of them, there are at least 150 impact funds which are there, and they all of them invest equity. So one of you asking a question, is it grant? No, they all actually invest equity. And some of them give debts. So the basket of funds which are out there, not necessarily the standard ones which are there. And very good names are there, very big names are there. Some of them are much bigger than Acumen, far more accomplished also in terms of the kind of breadth of the work they do. So there's a world out there. So here, I think, as I kind of said, this is where I've run into almost an hour. I didn't realize. As I said, I love my own voice, so I need to find a way to pause here and open it up for discussions on two things as to where you think whatever is the impact is going to do. And I had two questions pending to answer. I'll do that. And as an impact investor and a person looking at companies all the time, I'm always open to any questions you want to ask of an investor, and in general, and impact investor in particular. And with that, I kind of open up the floor. And if it's okay with everyone, I'll take off the slides. And the only thing I want to leave one picture. This is what our work has been till now, not to talk anything big about it. It's just that we have done around $30 million of investment in India, impacted, as we look at how many people we have impacted, 25 million. The companies that we have invested has gone on to raise 6 times the capital that we have put, 5 times to 6 times the capital at 5+X. And of course, the value of them is the market value of them. I mean, adding up the success and failures altogether is around 50. So that's kind of gives you a sense of the work we do. As I said, there are much larger impact investment funds out there in India. So this is a space which is just, if you ask me, getting started. Feels great to go on a mute for a few minutes, and I'll let all of you, any of you have any questions.
Yeah. I'm sure there are several questions. Please open up and ask. This is a good opportunity. Personally, for me, let me just spend 2 minutes to kick off some discussion around it. I discovered a whole new world out there. That's the way I'm putting it.
Nandakumar, I think your voice model, Nandakumar,
what you're doing, customer, supplier, supply chain, employees. So carry our supply chain and employees into that world, which to me
Nandakumar, sir,
seem to be
just a moment, please.
Nandakumar, your voice is garbled. I think, sorry.
Voice is not coming out clear.
Yeah, it's not clear. So
okay, let me. Okay, one sec. One sec. Sorry. How is it now?
No.
Is it better now?
When you talk like this, it's better, but.
Okay. Yeah, is it better? It must have improved now. Has it? Okay.
Yeah,
because,
the last part is
okay, because I left my office and I drove home and I was on what you call 4G, and now I come back to Wi-Fi. So I forgot to switch back. I suppose it's clear now. Okay. I just want to thank, I think, Mahesh, I discovered a whole new world out there, which says that outside the boundaries of our organization, business model, customers, there is something that is happening, and we can easily participate in that at very little investment in terms of cost of capital that may go there. And personally, I did not see too much of conflict. I think the analogy of quality was very well put. Because when we started our careers, quality was short-term and long-term. You do something for quality, you lose money. Then later on, we realized that quality is free. You know, that was a word coined. And subsequently, now we'll say impact is free because you do it and then it sort of pays off in the long term. So I do see a lot of overlap between what we do and what we could do in the future, and it should align. except that some of the returns may be long-term, but it is, I think, excellent example of Kheti, where early days they built it into their business model, if you can call it business model, an extended business model. And I would say that end of the day, all of us want to touch many lives, whatever we do, whether we work in a company or we work in a startup or we run our own enterprise. We want to touch as many people as possible. And this is really a revelation for me, because I thought social impact meant only beneficiaries who don't pay for the product. But here we are talking about customers who pay and the depth of the impact it has, as well as employees and how they could realize the value that they are offering to the customers and the ecosystem. So there's so much of hidden potential. That's the message that I've got. I don't know if others are able to echo something similar.
Hey, hi, Vignesh here. I have a kind of question with respect to the concept of impact itself. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. So since I come from a slightly technological background, the term impact, we've been talking about positive sort of impact. But if you look at the rapid pace in which we're having this technology progress, it's becoming also very difficult for us to figure out what the negative impact of any of these advancements could be. So as companies, you're able to see what the positive impact of this could be, but we kind of are blindsided to what negative impacts could happen because of that. So how do you kind of capture, or how do you kind of evaluate, how do you become slightly more socially responsible with respect to this aspect of impact itself? And like another question is it even important to kind of look at it, because there could always be a negative impact for every positive impact that it does. So how do you kind of look at that, that aspect of impact?
Brilliant question, Vignesh, and very thoughtful of you. I think you're absolutely right. Many technologies, we all know that could have some consequential negative impact. I think the fact that you are aware of it upfront that it could have and watching for it, because sometimes you may not know. When you start, you may not know, and you find it later. And how much shift one is willing to do is one way to think about it. I don't think one can be able to figure out everything which could go negative unless you walk into it knowing, right? Then it's very different. But if you don't walk into it knowing, but you figure out along the way, the very fact that today you are having the awareness to actually talk about that is the first step in my mind, because not many people think like that. That is one. And second is, yeah, some of them will have, if I could call it, at some stage you'll have to make an equation, right? Is the positive impact overriding the negative impact at one individual level is one way to think about it. However, there is another dimension to think about positive and negative, which I can try, is that it's positive on some, but negative on others.
Yeah.
That's a very important dimension to bring into the mind, because then what you are doing is actually creating positive haves and a have not. And that is more negative in my mind to keep thinking about, because then overall equation may come okay. But if you are actually in trying to do positive to somebody, as I said, if you try to do positive to a consumer and you are actually doing below daily wage and really doing a bad thing with the people who are working in your system as labor, then that's kind of, I'm just giving a very contrasting example. In technology also, you can see if you have impacting some positively and some others negatively, I think that then that's where you can build your consciousness to go, not do that or mitigate that. But if it's positive and negative occurring at an individual level or at one together, is the overall positive going to override negative over a period of time? And you got to put a time lens to it. I think I'm trying to attempt an answer and not trying to say this is a perfect answer, because what you're asking is a very good conflict question. And appreciate you raising that. Thanks for that. But there were some questions here which I wanted to not miss out. And anyone can ask. One was that somebody asked this question: is it a grant or not? Is it clear, or you want any explanation or talk about that? Is it grant or somebody asked this? Is it grant or is it whoever it is? If they can articulate what was in their mind. And there's also a question: high capex technologies, can they have social impact? I'll give you an example. Yes, they can have. I'll come to that. Okay, maybe, I don't know who asked it. I try to, because it could be going in people's mind. Is it grant? It's not. For example, we do investments. I use a theory of change framework, but one can have impact only along with revenues. I didn't talk about revenues because you have a lot of good experts who have talked to you about how to do revenues and all. I was focused on impact. But you cannot create a scale. I mentioned somewhere, scale of impact is important, right? You can't do that if your business is not, revenue is not going to sustain a large number which can create a positive impact. It is a balance. It is not either or. So, and if I'm investing if I'm looking at it, only difference is I look at both as an investor. I would look at financial returns possible. I'll also look at whether the company will create an ongoing impact for a period of time. And both are needed. And then we do investments, we take stake. And it's not just the Acumen. There are a lot of, as I said, more than 100 plus impact investors in India who do that. And it's not a grant. In India, it's in fact very difficult to give a grant to private enterprises. You can give grant only to non-profits in India. And I'm saying this because grant is not a bad thing. You need grant at a certain stage in a company's life. You need grant at a lab stage. You need grant at a technology proving stage when you want to take out the technical risk. At times, grant is more important than equity. So, but not when the company is ready to scale and ready to iterate a business model. Then grants don't really help. There was another question here on capex. We for example, have invested in a company which does chilling for dairy, chilling solutions for dairy, and it's a capex heavy model. And they also don't even sell it to the farmers directly. They sell it to companies like the one in Chennai, Hudson is a big customer. And several others, Hudson, then Nestle, then Amul. And but they have phenomenal impact. Well, the impact that they have is milk. Number one, milk goes through the journey where it picks up what is called as the MTR, which is there in that milk. The longer it kind of takes, the quality of the milk deteriorates, and that means the price that farmers get are affected. There's always a fixed price. So every dairy company has a price, but they collect it at various stages and goes to a big cold storage. This company tries to intermediate that and make it at a group of village or a village level, a smaller chillers, and phenomenally impact farmers' incomes as well as quality of milk that all of us can have. And so that's kind of one of the things which is, if you could ask me, creating phenomenal social impact. And there's also invested by several companies who have taken stake in them. So things like that can be done. It's a capex model. It's not a revex model. So I don't think it's driven by whether it's capex or revex. Thanks.
Yeah, hi sir. This is Jairaj.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one question. Acumen, at what stage of a startup does it fund? And so post funding, what support does it give? So say if it is a tech startup, so what kind of a support does Acumen provide?
Okay, Acumen specifically, when we invest, what we call that we say that post the angel stage, pre-series A, much before, we quite often are the first institutional investor. So we take huge risk. We call ourselves as a stage one investor. So we come just after angel family round or whatever you want to call it, but before a full-fledged series A round, we come not when the company is already fully proven profit model, but it's on the pathway to profitability. we will know that the first iteration of the model may or may not work, and we have to do a couple before it can be getting on the pathway. And I think that's the stage we work. So we are quite catalytic in the way we want to look at the solution. So we come very early, but clearly at a market fit stage. We don't come at a stage where the technology is being tested. We come at a stage when the market business fit is being tested and the business model is being tested. That's the stage at which we come. That's at the stage question. Technology support, we do have some technology companies, but not, to be very honest, Acumen directly. And for that matter, I don't think many investors are good at supporting tech solutions and all. I think they could get, because of their contacts, mentors in the which we have. We have a set of mentors who will come and can guide, but I'm not entirely sure it can be specific for a tech all the time. That's a very honest answer. Some tech we can connect people because of our network. We are able to bring mentors or coaches to the teams which are thinking about it. But we don't provide, if I could call it, real tech support in terms of a lab or something else. No, we don't do that. Or validation from that perspective. Purely tech, we're not capable of doing that, and we are not good at that. So we don't do, and to the best of my knowledge, many investors don't do, and very few can actually support tech. They all will have a view on tech, but will not support tech, and they will tell you which tech to use, not to use, but they will not support tech.
Thanks.
They are all thinking deeply about a lot of concepts that were shared, and I'm sure they need little time to digest it. But tell me, Mahesh, when you said you will not support tech through a lab or other than mentoring, in the non-tech space, when you go beyond, is it just giving finance, you will also handhold in building their company and take it to a...
Yeah,
okay.
we do that. That we do. As I said, that's what I'm saying. We could do easily things like marketing, finance, governance. That is easier for us. But tech in general, not easy for us. And I think many investors, because it's a specialized skill, right? It's not something investors possess. And we definitely don't. There are very few, I think, who do. I'm trying to think in the landscape, not just Impact, any investors. I know others, but very few of them. There are investors in the US and all, but I don't see any of them like that in India. Like people even at Y Combinator and all, people all here, right? They do, but that's kind of coding and very specific. But other than that, tech, I'm not sure of. Yeah, but we do support on marketing, finance, governance, board, all these stuff. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to IIT Chennai and all of you who have kind of listened through. And I really appreciate. And my coordinates are there with IIT Chennai. Anybody has anything to at any stage to reach out and ask. Always open within the bandwidth constraint I can. I'll definitely respond. That is for sure. Because I just love the fact that all of you are creating something, creating value. This is the greatest thing, and happy to be engaged in any manner which can be useful. And once again, thank IIT Chennai and Nandakumar for having me here.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time to interact with all our startups. I think the session was really insightful, and I think all of our startups were really benefited from this. We will be sending you a feedback from, as usual. So please let us know your thoughts for today's session. And if you have any suggestion for any topics or something like that, so you can share it with us. So, and thank you, sir. Nandakumar, sir, thank you so much.
Thank you, Suparna. Thank you. Thank you all participants for your participation.
Thank you for coming.
Have a great day.
Thank you for your time.